friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I've got a card for you using Hello Bluebird's Party on the Farm and the Farmland 6x6 background stamp. So I stamped everything out in Lawn Fawn jet black ink on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock, and I'm going to be coloring with my Copic markers. So I'm going to start with the background image, and I'm taking B000 and flicking that color in from the sides and just covering that sky portion up at the top. I did tuck a piece of cheap white cardstock under that panel so that I could color right off the edge, but I will also be die cutting this panel down slightly. So any little bit of white space, if anything were to show, would not be a big deal, but I find having that extra piece of paper underneath is really helpful. I added some color with the B01, and now I'm going back to that B000 to blend that out. And it's a little bit tricky to avoid those clouds, but I did get a little bit of color in them, but I'll fix that in just a minute. I'm going to bump things up with a little B02 and then blend that out with the B000 once again. And then to clean up that little bit of color that got into the clouds, I'm just going to grab my 0 marker, the Colorless Splendor, and push that color back across the line into the blue where it should be. And then I'm going to take the B000 and I'm going to start down at the landscape edge, the horizon line, and just flick up from the bottom to give those clouds a little bit of shading down toward the bottom. I still want them to look nice and white and fluffy, but I just want to have a little bit of dimension down at that horizon line. So once I'm happy with that, I'm once again going to grab that Colorless Splendor and just kind of blend over the edge of that to help it fade into the white. Then I'm going to go up to the fields, and I'm going to start with YR20, YR21, and YR23, and I'm going to do every other stripe. You can do this however you want. I've seen people color this all one solid color. I've seen people do it in different shades of green or green and brown. It really depends what kind of crops you want to be kind of growing back there in the distance. But I'm going to have so much green in the front portion of the card that I wanted to just add a different tone there. So I'm using these kind of brownish yellows and coloring in every other stripe like I said, and then I'm going to switch and do the rest of the stripes as dirt, and for those I'm using E33, E35, and E37. And I'm putting the shadows on the left hand side, mainly just because that's the most comfortable since the stripes are curved a little bit toward the left. So I'm starting with that E37 and putting that kind of right up on that dotted line that separates each stripe, and then blending out with the E35. And then I'm going to go in and quickly color in the rest of those with the E33. And I did do a second layer on all of this off screen as well. And then I was trying to decide what I wanted to do with the strip that goes right in front of the barn. And I decided to do that in the browns as well. On any farms that I've been on, I know the area in front of the barn is usually a big muddy patch because there's so much traffic with the tractors and the harvesters and the cows coming in to be milked and all of that going on in that area. So I didn't think it would probably be very grassy. And this time I put my shading at the bottom and the highlight at the top because the sun would be hitting that portion the most. So next I'm going to move on to my barn, and I'm going to do a red barn. So I chose R24, R29, and R39 for that. Starting with R39 and adding some shading over to this little side portion there, and then blending that out with the R29. And then I'm going to fill in with that R24, which adds a nice bit of brightness to this combo. And then I got a little bit of Copic on my finger, and it looked kind of bloody, but it was just on there. So I cleaned that off with a alcohol swab, which I keep in my desk for clearing off my craft mat as well. That's a little tip for you if you get some on you. And it doesn't take off your nail polish, so that's really cool. And then I'm moving on to the lower section of the main part of the barn. And again, just blending in the same way, adding those shadows on the sides and then up under that kind of, I'm thinking that it's like a roof that's extending out a little bit, like a little small piece. But it could be whatever you want it to be. And then I'm going to do the top portion and again put a nice shadow up under that roof, and also on the sides and the bottom part of the window. I didn't do it on the top just because there wasn't much space there, and I didn't want it to get too heavy. So blending it out with the R29 once again, and then filling in with that R24, just making sure to really go over the edge of that R29 and break up any harsh lines. For the silo, I decided to go with the neutral grays, and these are brand new to me. I just got these recently and I haven't used them a whole lot yet. I do plan on doing a gray Copics comparison video if that's something that you guys would be interested in. Please leave me a comment down below and let me know so you can just see how the 4 different gray families kind of compare to one another. But I'm starting with N0, N1, N3, and then I threw in some N5 because it wasn't quite dark enough. And just trying to keep a shine mark in the center of that so it looks nice and round. I did decide to do a second layer on that silo as well because it just felt like that shine in the middle got a little bit lost. So I'm kind of beefing up those shadows on the outer edges and pulling that color slowly toward the center, and then finally adding a little of that N0 so that it maintains that look. And then I did that little lip part with the N5 as well. And then I decided to color in all the roof lines on the barn with the N5. Just coloring those in solid, and then I'm going to add some shadows in just a second. I'm also creating a little bit of a shadow inside the hayloft, and then I'm going to take the N7 and just pull in a little bit of that color to add those shadows, like I said, on that roof line. And then I will go back to the N5 to just blend that into the first layer of the N5 that I had already laid down. And then I did also add a little bit of shadow to the lower window over on the side there. Just kind of adding a few of those shades and pulling that color down. And then I used the N0 to add a little shading to the bottom part of the barn doors so that they could remain white. And then I'm going to do the trees on the sides of the barn and the bushes. And I went with G20, G21, G24, and G28. So I'm starting with the G28 and laying in some shadows closest to that barn where the bushes would be cast in shadow. And then for the trees, I'm just doing it on the right side because the barn would still be kind of casting a shadow over in that direction. I'm going to blend that out with the G24, and I'm kind of doing like little dot detail to break up that color and make it look a little bit more leafy and not so smooth. I want to keep a bit of texture there. I'm using G21 next and taking that almost all the way to the top, but I saved a little bit of room on each of those bushes and trees for the G20, which is a nice light shade that's just going to give it a bit of brightness there on the top edge. Once that's done, I'm actually going to go back in with my G28 and add just a few more dots to really give it the look of some leaves there. And I'll use the G24 as well to add a few more and just kind of let that fade into the coloring that I've already done. And then for the hayloft, I added a little bit of YR21 in the window, and then I decided to darken up the bottom of that with YR23. And now I'm ready to start tackling that front yard, and I'm going to begin with YG01. I wanted something that was really bright and fresh looking, so I went with the YGs because they have a lot of yellow tone in them. And they just remind me of like a new leaf, a new grass, because I want this to be kind of like an early spring on the farm type scene. Although, yeah, the fields, well, they could also be barren fields waiting for planting. So I'm darkening that up with YG03, and again, just flicking that color in from the sides. I want the center portion to be the lightest and then have more deep shadows on the edges. I'm going to continue with YG05, just pulling that color in, trying to carefully color around the fence, but I will have to clean that up a bit later on as well. It's just a little bit tricky to avoid when I'm trying to color quickly, because I don't want this video to be so long that nobody would be interested in watching. So I am working a little bit more quickly than I would if I weren't filming a video. I'm going to deepen that up even further with the YG17. That's going to be my darkest shade for the grass. And I want to pull that color further towards the center as I get to the bottom, so that it keeps kind of like a little oval shape of a light patch in the center. So it looks like maybe the sun is directly overhead. Maybe it's like noon, and so the sun is shining in the middle of the yard right there. So then I'm going to start working my way back down with YG05 and YG03, just pulling that color a little bit more toward the center and eating into some of that white space, filling in a little bit more under the fence because that would also cast a bit of a shadow, and then back to my lightest shade, the YG01, to just fill in any remaining white space on this scene. And then I kind of took a look at it to assess how things were going and decided that I just wanted a few more deeper shadows. So I went back to my YG17 and I'm just pulling in a second layer of that in a few select places, not everywhere. Like I said, I just wanted to beef up those shadows on the edges and, you know, keep that light area toward the center of the card. And then just to blend out the edges of that quickly, I'm just going to go back to my lightest shade, the YG01, and do a few more swipes of color over that grassy area. And then I went in with my colorless blender to try to clean up some of that fence, just scrubbing over that and pushing that color into the paper so that I can get it back towards white, or as white as I possibly can. I wasn't able to get it completely white again, especially like the bluer greens like the YG17 stained a little bit more than what I would have liked. So I ended up deciding that I would color the fence in brown. But I just wanted something that looked more like weathered wood, nothing that was like too bright. I already have a lot of color going on and I haven't even gotten to the images yet. So I went in with a little bit of E42 and then I jumped to E44. I'm going to add a little bit of shading to the slats behind each post, and then also add a little shading to the left side of each post. And just quickly color that in. A bunch of that fence is going to be covered up by my images anyway, so I didn't want to spend too much time on it. And then I'm just going to blend that out with the E42 once again, just real quick and easy. And that is going to complete my background. So I will lift that up so you can see all of that detail. And then we'll set this panel aside and move on to our images. So for the cow, I wanted to do a brown spotted cow. So I'm starting with the base layer, and I'm using E40 and E41 for that. Using the E41 first to lay in some shadows and give him a little bit of dimension. Any place where I think they should go, where his front legs are kind of crossed over his chest, and along the back side of his body, around the sides of his head, especially the lower part, and then underneath his head where it would be casting a shadow on his neck. And then I'm blending that out with the E40, and I'm going to let that fade into the white. I want to keep a little bit of a softer look on him so that the spots that I'm going to add later on really stand out. And then I'm going to grab my colorless blender and kind of smooth the transition areas a bit so that it just kind of softens and you don't have those like harsh rings of color. I'm also going to color in his tail with the E41 and then the E40. And then I'm going to let that dry for a bit before I come in with the spots. Otherwise, they would kind of disperse. They wouldn't be quite as crisp because that image is so saturated. So I'm moving on to the udders. I guess it's a she, not a he. I just tend to always call everything a he because I have all boys in my family. But I'm using YR000, YR00, and YR01 and adding that color to the udder and the nose. And then I'm also going to add a bit to the insides of the ears. I decided to do a second layer though because that YR01 wasn't giving me enough contrast on that first layer. So I did go in with a second layer to just smooth everything out a bit nicer. And then it was a little too peach. I wanted a tiny bit more of a rosy tint to it. So I added a bit of R000 in there as well. And then, like I said, I'm going to do the insides of the ears. I just added a touch of the YR01 and the YR00. And then I'm blending out with the YR000 and also adding in a little of that R000. So now his body has dried enough for me to start coming in with some spots. And I'm going to use E21, E23, and E25 for that. So I began with the E25, and then I'm coloring over the edge of that with the E23, and then using that E21 to kind of soften it into the rest of his hide. That E21 is fairly light, so it's going to make a nice transition into the E40s that I've already used. And I'm just going to pick places here and there to add those colors and create some different shapes. And then if the E21 pushes the E23 back too much, which it did a few times, then I'll just go back in and add a little more of that E23 and blend that out once again. I'm going to add a few spots to his arms and just repeat this same process until, I give him his own little personality and I think he looks cute. You can do as many spots or as few as you wanted, or you don't even necessarily have to add any. I mean, there are light cows and there are Jersey cows and Angus cows and there's so many different ways that you can color them. You could do Holsteins and give them black spots. It really just depends on what you're going for. I just decided that I thought the rich tones of these browns would just kind of bring him to the forefront. For me, he's kind of the main image in this scene. I'm imagining that it's her birthday, so I just wanted to have those rich browns. I feel like just add a lot, draw your eye to them. So that E21 was getting a little bit leaky on me at this point. You can see there's kind of some standing color there at the top. So I kind of took a little break from using it for a second and moved on to the tail. And when I got to the light part of the tail, I just was real careful and kept an eye on that nib. If it would have started to leak, I would have pulled off the other cap to equalize the pressure in the barrel so that it wouldn't do that on me, because it's nothing like a leaky marker to ruin your coloring. But anyway, I'm moving on to the hooves, and I added in E29, and I decided to stick with those rich browns instead of adding in black or something like that. And I did the pig's hooves the same while I was at it. And then I'm going to move on to coloring that little pig, and I didn't want him to be the same exact color as the cow's udders and nose. So I went with the R's. I'm using R00, R01, and R02. And I'm doing the shadows for him with the R02 first. I'm shading mainly on the right hand side since he's facing toward the left. So I'll keep the highlight on the left side so you can see his features really clearly. And then I'm blending that out with the R01. And I'll fill in most of his body with the R00 for the highlight, but I decided to have his face be a little bit lighter even, so I'm going to go back to that R000 and fill in the rest of his face with that. And then I wanted his muzzle to stand out a bit more and not just kind of fade into the rest of his body. So I'm going to switch up and do the muzzle in the same shades that I used for the cow. But first I decided to do a second layer on that pig. I just wanted a bit more contrast. So that's an easy way to get, darker shades out of your markers, is to just do that second layer. So I'm using that YR01 and YR00 and then blending that out with the R triple for the nose. And then I'm moving on to the little chicks, and I'm going to use some fun yellows for that, some bright yellows to bring some pop to this card. And I chose Y11, Y13, and Y15. I'm going to color them both at once since they're fairly small and right next to each other, so it's easy to do. I used the Y15 for the shadows, and then I'm blending out with the Y13, and then I'll use the Y11 for the highlight. And again, I just shaded them in the direction that they were facing, so it's a little different for each of them. I decided to do the frosting on the cupcake in yellow as well. And then I'm going to do one of the little party hats, the pom-pom on the top in these yellows. And then one of the bases in yellow as well, the bottom of the hat. And I'm going to next do the little beaks and the flame on the candle using YR04. And then I wanted to pull in some more blues since I already have blues in the sky, and it's these same B tones, some of them, the B01 and the B02 were in the sky, but I want to darken it up and create a bit more depth for the cupcake liner and the party hats, so I added in that B04 to beef up that color and then blend it out with the B02 and the B01. So everything will match, but it'll just bring the images in the forefront a little bit closer to the eye because they have that more depth to them. And then I'm going to do my red combo again, same red combo. And I'm going to do another one of the party hats and another pom-pom. I chose the one on the yellow hat, just making sure that each hat and pom-pom is a different shade. So I started with the R39, blended out with the R29, and then filled in with the R24. And then for the last combo, I'm going to go back to the greens that I used on the trees in the distance to pull that color forward as well. But I'm going to skip the G20 for this combo and just use the G28 for the shadows, blending out with the G24 as the midtone, and then the G21 for the highlight. Then I'm going to grab a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen, get it started off to the side, and go over the eyes of my pig and my cow to make those bright and shiny once again. And then I'm going to take a white Sakura Jelly Roll pen, and I'm going to add some polka dots to the base of all of the party hats just to make them a little bit more fun and break up some of that solid color and make them look a little bit more festive. And I decided to do that on the cupcake liner as well. And once I'm done with that, I will trim all these images out with their matching dies. So I've taken the Lawn Fawn outside in stitch rectangle stackables and die cut that background so that I have a nice crisp edge and also that nice stitch detail on the outside edge as well. I'm going to stamp It's Your Day at that top cloud using VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I did stamp it down twice to make sure it was nice and bold and matched the black stamping of the cloud edges. And then I'm going to do an insert for the inside of the card. I'm stamping in Lawn Fawn Noble Fur ink, and I'm going to use the little goat in this scene and a balloon and the other sentiment which says happy birthday. And I stamped that down twice as well. And then I'm ready to start assembling. So I've created a card base using Lawn Fawn Noble Fur cardstock, so it matches the ink I used on the insert. And then I just had to get my glue started. It clogged up again. It's getting pretty low, so I think that there's like more air in there. So I just had to run the needle through the tip once again to get that flowing, and then I could glue that insert to the inside of the card to finish that off. And then I'll take the background panel and I'm going to glue that down to the front of the card, and it's going to give me that nice little bit of the Noble Fur cardstock showing through on the outside edges. Just acts as a nice frame. Then I'm going to start with my largest image, which is my little cow, and I'm going to glue her at the bottom of the scene, but a little bit high in the scene because I want the other critters to be kind of gathered around her. So then I'll take the pig, and that's going to go just a little bit to the right. And then I have my two little chicks. This one here I'm going to add down at the bottom left, overlapping the cow's foot just a little bit. And then I have the other one that's going to go to the right of the pig, and that'll be overlapping his tail a tiny bit as well, just to make everything look a little bit more like a scene and not just like images kind of slapped down. I'm going to have the pig holding the cupcake, so they're kind of all gathered around to sing the cow happy birthday so that she can blow out her candle. And then I'm going to add a party hat to each of them. So I'm just going to kind of pick randomly which one goes where. But since this hat kind of matches the cupcake, I didn't want it to go on the pig, so that's why I chose it for the cow. And then I'm going to add one to the little chick. And then I added the red one with the green pom-pom to the pig, but I'm going to end up switching that because the last one was yellow, and I didn't want a yellow hat on the yellow chick. So I just swapped those two before that ink, before the glue was dry. And I couldn't resist adding just a touch of stickles, so I added a little bit to each of the pom-poms on the party hats. And then I'm going to lift this card up to the camera and show you all of the detail with the coloring and the little white polka dots, and then there's another peek at the inside as well. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I know it was a bit of a longer video, but I hope you enjoyed the coloring process. I had so much fun creating it for you. If you did like it, please be sure to hit that thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Ring that notification bell so you never miss a video. If you're interested in any of these products, I'll have everything listed and linked for you in the description bar below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much again for watching. I hope you have an amazing day. Bye-bye.